the whole idea of new normal scares me. I reject the new normal. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it because I don't believe in any such thing. We talked a little bit about your contribution, your maiden speech, I should say, and you also mentioned as well in there, and the phrase that stuck with me more than anything in your maiden speech was that debate is the bedrock of democracy. If there's one thing I would really pin to you and would see you as an advocate for and a champion for is debate, Claire, because you've always been somebody, I've noticed on social media, for example, I've seen people be quite vitriol and hatred towards you, but you always give them a right to reply. You don't block them instantly. Some people deserve blocking, I know, but you tend to try to give them the courtesy of a response or an answer, because that's not what they want. They're not intellectual enough to come up with anything. They just want to spit out their hatred and vile towards you or I or many other people. But you've always been like that. I've noticed you've always welcomed in of different ideas, different opinions. That is why I've grown to respect you and admire you, because there's not many people that have the ability to hold on to their own convictions and opinions, but be open at the same time to allow discourse for other opinions to be able to be debated and discussed. And that is rare, especially given the fact that we're seeing, the bedrock of our democracy under attack and threatened. And I think that's what you get into the heart of. The debate is the bedrock of democracy, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, how can you change anything if you don't believe in debate? I mean, I do not, you asked me about my teenage years in Buckley. I don't have the same views now that I had then. Over the course of the years, people have shown me enough respect to argue with me that I was wrong. They didn't just insult me and close me down. They told me, look, you're wrong. They've looked me in the eye and said, you're being daft there. You need to read this book. You need to think about this again. You need to look at it a different way. And through the course of that, that's how young people learn how to think for themselves, because they're challenged, they have debates, they realize there's more than one side to the argument, and you think about it, and that liberates you to be able to change your mind. And in the referendum, there would be people who change their minds either way. That's what's the point in having a referendum or an election if you assume that people are never going to change their minds? And in order to change their minds, they have to have as much information as possible. You have to have free speech and you have to have debate. So you and I might disagree on certain things, right? But we are just going to be able to have that conversation. We won't necessarily change each other's minds, but something you say might make me think, that's an interesting point, and vice versa. So I've always believed in that. And the reason why, because I genuinely don't think we have arrived at the end result of a perfect society. And therefore, if we want to improve it, we have to convince people that it needs to be improved in this way or that way. You mentioned prison. I'm a great champion of prison reform. You made it an illusion about prison. Prison reform is a big thing for me. There's lots of things I'd like to do there. That's quite controversial. A lot of people, as soon as you say that, because I'm probably on the kind of soft side, I want a decent education in prison. In fact, we have a thing called Debating Beyond Bars, which is a debating competition for prisoners. I think that that's hugely important to learn how to deal with ideas. If you're going to be pugilistic, do it intellectually, not through your fists, that sort of thing. But not everyone agrees with me. So let me have a chance to have that argument and win people over. That's what debate's for.
Yeah, and I suppose is this what led you to set up Academy of Ideas? You're obviously clearly passionate about it. And before I go to that question, I just want to say about prisoners. I've worked with ex-offenders for many, many years. Me and my wife set up rehabilitation centres. We've worked with them, and we've seen many people's life transform and change. And a lot of it was down to education. They had no education when they were younger for a whole range of social reasons. I was one of them, as you know my story. But I went to a rehabilitation centre myself, turned my life around, and the rest of the day is history. But we need to give people the opportunity to change. We've got to allow for that in our society. I absolutely concur with that. But do you think that your journey through your teenage years, through your political career, I call it a career, you don't see it as that, I know, in the European Parliament, what you witnessed and what you saw, you were seeing things happening and wondering if democracy was under attack and maybe the debate was being shut down by the people who were offended. You can't say that squad, those kinds of people. Is that what inspired you to launch Academy of Ideas?
Well, I launched the Academy of Ideas 20 years ago. I mean, it's hard to imagine, because sometimes people, you know, some of the controversy about me is when people say, oh, she's gone from Revolutionary Communist Party to Brexit Party. But actually, the Revolutionary Communist Party closed down in 1997, right? So it's been a while. And one of the things and then I was the publisher of LM, which was Living Marxism, and that closed in 2000. And one of the insights I'd gained, I'd been a teacher, a social worker, all sorts of things over the years, was I thought that face-to-face debate was really important. And I'm passionate about young people and education. So I thought, I'm going to put on these big festivals and conferences and debates where I show people that there's always two sides to a story, or maybe four sides, you know, there's layers. More important, at the time we launched it, there was like everything was spin doctoring, and I wanted to say there's more than the headline. So yes, that's why I did it. And then you're right, you know, as time has gone on, it's become even more important because there's been assaults on free speech with people saying I find that offensive. And I wrote a book called I Find That Offensive 4 years ago, and sadly the assaults on free speech have got worse. And we know ourselves, you and I both have experienced this, that what we thought was a genuine political democratic debate about a constitutional matter, about whether we should leave the European Union, turned into a slanging match. Instead of debating it, people just said, if you vote leave, you are a xenophobic little Englander racist. And they didn't want to debate at all. They wanted to attack you. And that struck me as being such a dangerous position for democracy, because I thought we were doing it in good faith, see who won the argument at a referendum. But it seemed that other people said, if when you have a democratic debate, the wrong side win, let's have the debate at all.
Well, we're seeing a lot of that now with the whole US elections. I don't want to talk too much about it because I've had a break from it. But, you know, we talk a lot about losers' consent, didn't we, during the referendum, and those who voted Remain and lost, they weren't consenting very well, let's be honest. And we see them up in arms now over what's happening in the US. You know, I mean, how it changes so quickly. But what I do appreciate with the Academy of Ideas, and I know you run the Festival of Ideas as well, is the way that you allow so many different people to engage with some incredible minds. And from personal experience, I know the last one I came on that you hosted or put on, I think Mo Lovett hosted it, or one of the guys there anyway, and Frank Ferretti was speaking, this guy. I met him at the last conference you put on, actually, Claire, that I came to, and you allowed me kindly to speak at it and contribute a small part. But Frank gave an incredible speech, I thought, and a talk about this book and what democracy means and how it's under attack and threat and everything else. And I haven't read the book yet, and I can't wait to read it. So I appreciate the work of Academy of Ideas. And for those of you watching the broadcast, you really need to check them out. They're an amazing organization doing great things. And there's so many events coming up. They've got events coming all the time on Eventbrite. Check them out. They're all on there as well. Well, Claire, our time is almost up because this is YouTube, and I'd like to keep it short because people normally switch off. But what's the future for Baroness Fox then? What's the future hold for you, Claire?
I'm going to try and use the House of Lords to raise questions and issues that just wouldn't normally be heard. I mean, I don't want to be over confident about that. There are some very great minds in the House of Lords. So there's some fantastic speakers and, you know, people who do raise interesting issues. I'm just going to try and do that. I'm going to carry on with the Academy of Ideas. I think the bigger question for both of us and for all of us is, what's the future for democracy? Or, you know, like you said, I am going to say something very quickly about the Trump question, because I do not, it is galling to have the likes of Remainers lecturing us about, you know, he lost fair and square and he's got to accept the result, when in fact we, as Leavers, had to listen to them trying to overturn when the Leave vote won. They basically said it was illegitimate and so on. But I do think that Donald Trump's lack of grace in terms of losers' consent does all of us no favors. And that's not because I relish a Biden presidency, not particularly. I'm worried about what's happening in America. But what that means is that we've all got to stop being caricatures of each other. I mean, we've got to listen to each other. So I'm going to, while I'm in the House of Lords, every week, as I have been doing, do a film where I tell you what's going on. I said in my maiden speech as well that I was going to be answerable. It's not the same as being accountable, but I do want to try and demystify one constitutional legislative part of the United Kingdom, which is the House of Lords. And I also want to draw attention to issues that wouldn't otherwise be raised there. So, you know, I enjoy sometimes talking about some of the things that happen in Wales that other peers of the realm from Wales don't like to get mentioned. And I'm looking forward to getting from you some good ideas about how I can expose some of the shenanigans in the Senedd.
Well, there's a lot of them, and I go with abolishing a lot of them, but that's just another story. Claire, just before we come to a close, you mentioned about your contribution in the House of Lords and speaking up and being answerable, not accountable to the people. Your last speech, which you can find on Facebook, by the way, folks, I've been following it because you've been doing like a journal, haven't you, online? It's been fantastic. It gives an insight really to us out here on the outside looking in and think, oh yeah, that's what goes on there. But you brought up the whole issue of lockdown, didn't you? And some of the issues surrounding that. What's your thoughts on that before we go?
Well, I definitely think that the lockdown issue is one of great concern to us, because I think it's completely disproportionate and is actually demobilizing people and knocking the stuffing out of people. And there's all sorts of things to be said about the terrible consequences for people with other illnesses in the way the NHS has become the COVID health service and not the health service. But it's also incredibly damaging. As we know, it's going to lead to mass unemployment. I mean, it's almost too depressing to think of. However, and this is important, and you know, you'll know that Nigel Farage and Richard Tice have just launched their Reform UK, which is an anti-lockdown party, and people might be interested in what my take on. Well, good on them for doing it. I'm not going to be part of it. I don't think you can. I don't think there's the basis for a party based on being anti-lockdown. I think that there is room for new political parties. So in a way, let 1,000 flowers bloom. But what I really want is people to just intelligently start challenging lockdown. You don't have to go out saying, I'm not wearing a mask, or being like a prat and being rude. But I do think you cannot let the government get away with basically tearing up our freedoms without good reason. And they recently, when they misused that data, when they had the chief medical officer, the chief scientific officer showing us graphs which are proven to be dodgy, you do start thinking of the dodgy dossier in the war in Iraq. You do start thinking, come on, stop taking us for fools. So I do think, be open-minded and always critical and always ask questions.
Well, I was going to close, but I can't. I got to come back to you on that, because I was asked about the Reform Party, of course, because I was with the Brexit Party. Lots of people have been messaging me and asking me, and I did prepare a statement, but I'm not that important, so I didn't put it out. I just wrote it for myself, you know, to reflect on. And I think the main reasons for me were, in the context of Wales, certainly, it's very different nationally. And I think an anti-lockdown party really doesn't have any longevity, because what happens after December if they stop the lockdown? What happens then? Now, I know that about reforming. So just want to say here to our viewers, I will not be joining the Reform Party, and I'll be staying with Abolish the Welsh Assembly, because I've got enough going on. We're trying to get rid of the lockdown in Cardiff Bay, by the way. Just thought I'd mention that. Claire, thank you ever so much for coming on today. I really, really appreciate it. And our time is up, even though I kept saying it. I'd love to keep you on longer, but we're restricted on time with the Zoom call as well.
That's good.
And thanks ever so much.
It's a pleasure. I want to say one thing to your viewers. What Richard's doing is very important, because creating an alternative space for ideas is exactly what we all should be doing. So I want to congratulate you on doing that.
Claire, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Baroness Fox of Buckley, and of course, the director of Academy of Ideas. Make sure you check them out, and I'll catch you soon on the next broadcast of Rich Politics.